President Trump signed an executive order that mandates something that you're going to be like, wait, that's not something that was already mandated and we're all in agreement on. Also, the libs in California are pushing for tax decreases, which is a first. Find out what they're trying to decrease the taxes on, and a bunch more here on this episode of Turning Point Tonight. My name is Jobob, and together we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Turning Point Tonight. Remember, you can email the show anytime you want, tpt@tpusa.com. You can email whether you agree with us or whether you're wrong. You can email just belligerently irresponsible nonsense. And, well, we probably won't read that, but if it is abhorrent and gross and terrible, there's a chance that we will read it in the fourth segment of this show. Now, before we get to our panel to discuss the news of the day, I think a lot of attention is being driven to NPR. NPR was on the Hill, the top leaders of PBS and NPR, in a subcommittee hearing in which they were grilled on whether or not their money is being spent effectively. Now, we can talk about all that stuff, and I'm sure there's going to be highlights that have trickled through the various shows day to day and probably into tomorrow, but I want to outline how NPR makes its money. The argument from the libs has constantly been, well, NPR doesn't receive federal funding, or less than 1% of the NPR budget comes from federal money. And that's technically true, but they're leaving out a massive caveat. In 1967, there was a Public Broadcasting Act passed by Congress, which established the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting gets about $500 million every single year from Congress. Then there's about $160 to $180 million, depending on the year, that goes towards issuing various community service grants for radio specifically. Those community service grants then go to the local radio stations, and the local radio stations then use that money to purchase syndicated radio, in this case, talk radio, and in most cases, NPR. Now, you may be thinking, well, why can't they purchase other news outlets or syndicated conversation radio talk show pieces? Well, they can't, because by default, it has to be, according to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting guidelines, nonpartisan or educational, and happens to be that NPR falls in that category. All I'm trying to say is this. Does federal money go from the federal government to NPR directly? Not exactly. No, instead, they issue grants through the Corporation of Public Broadcasting that goes to the local radio stations. The local radio stations then circulate that money back to NPR. So the people that are saying, well, NPR doesn't receive government funding, it's less than 1%. Yeah, get out of here with your crap. A lot of that money comes from taxpayers and then gets funneled in a sort of circular way back into the national public radio, or as some of my favorite radio people like to call it, nakedly progressive radio. Here to comment on that and so much more is Ivy Van Dusen, conservative commentator, and Chris Hand, host of The Chris Hand Show. Guys, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Happy to be here.
Chris, I want to start with you on this one because you are a public radio host, or not a public radio host. Sorry, I don't want to cast you as an NPR.
Don't put that on me.
Yeah, you have a radio show that can be heard by the public. Now, your local station may get some of this federal money in terms of grants, but they can't use it to purchase your show because you're a partisan hack, of course. But of course, NPR is not. How does this make you feel, this whole circular money going around the way NPR kind of funnels money back to themselves, the feds funnel money to NPR?
I mean, the thing with NPR is they may be evil, but they're not dumb, and they understand where this money is coming from. They're funneling it via proxy, and we see this so many times in so many other government institutions. But if NPR had to monetize themselves the way private radio does, they would fail, and this is causing them to shake in their boots. I mean, think about it. How many left-wing radio personalities do you know that are even moderately successful? I can think of one, and it's Jimmy Dore, and I think the left has completely disowned him at this point because he speaks too much truth. The problem is that there's no appetite for this left-wing talking point. It has to be forced down your throat. Therefore, the government has to subsidize it, and that's why we're seeing issues today. Some of the quotes, though, that I saw were NPR chief Catherine Moore was making statements. They were calling her out in her past tweets. This is who's in charge of NPR. This is nonpartisan, by the way. America is addicted to white supremacy. She said that. America believes in black plunder and white democracy. She said that. And she was also on record for yes on reparations. That's who's in charge of NPR currently. Does it sound nonpartisan to you?
Yeah, that sounds very down the middle, completely nonpartisan. There's no sway there at all over at NPR. Ivy, so this sounds like I don't know if you have kids, and I don't know how many kids you have if you do have kids, but it sounds like your daughter has a cookie, and you tell your daughter, hey, don't give that cookie to your brother. And then she goes, gives the cookie to her sister, and then her sister gives the cookie to her brother. And she says, well, I didn't give the cookie to the little brother. Would that fly in your household? This again, kind of circular way of funneling money or cookies in this instance?
No, Yeah, absolutely not. So I have 2 kids. I have another one on the way. So I'm used to the BS and I know how to read right through it. And I think, like Chris said, this happens all the time in the government. This reminds me of Planned Parenthood. I know they talk about abortions and how they say, well, it's not really funded by taxpayers. It's not, and they just ignore it. Or it's just 1%, or it's just this. We're not that stupid. Dig into it. Go look. It is funded by the taxpayers. They know it. That's why they're worried about this. That's why they don't want to talk about this. Yeah, I just think it's very easy to see right through it.
Yeah, speaking of things to see right through, is the libs trying to alter elections by not having anybody show proof that they are eligible to vote in elections? This is apparently not a federal thing, which it's crazy to me that it's not. And we knew that it's not, but the fact that this is even a topic of conversation is nuts to me. President Trump yesterday signed an executive order that on federal forms would require proof of citizenship. In other words, you have to prove that you're able to vote. A bunch of big media outlets, including the Apple News Daily podcast that I listen to because, well, I need to punish myself for my sins and listen to that garbage. But they said, well, this is going to be met with lawsuits. So apparently there are libs out there saying, hey, we don't want the proof of citizenship. Now, we know this is happening, but Chris, why is it that this is a hill they're still willing to die on when Americans want election integrity?
I mean, I could do this very, very quickly. Kamala Harris won 13 states with no voter ID required. She won 4 states where just a photo ID where no photo ID was required, and only 2 states where photo ID was required. This is really the crux of the issue. The Democrats know that they're pulling a fast one on the American people, and they want to keep doing it. I mean, it's as simple as that. But they'll scream racism. Yet on the conservative side, if there's a white Norwegian who is an illegal alien, I don't want him voting either, to be perfectly honest with you. It's not a race thing. It's a citizenship thing.
Yeah, it doesn't. And also, by the way, every country in the world effectively does this sort of thing. And a lot of countries don't have well, if you were born here, you're a citizen. You have to earn your citizenship in some way, shape, or form. Ivy, is this going to get a bunch of pushback, you think? Do you think Speaker Johnson will try and get this through the House and make it an actual federal law?
Yes, I think he will, and I think he should. I think it's one of those things that's just a no-brainer. There's a lot of those things that are coming up right now that it's like, why hasn't this happened this entire time? Why hasn't, of course, and even a lot of like Democrats agree that voter ID is important. People, like you said, all across the world, every civilized democracy across the world requires some form of voter ID. And I think it's ridiculous. And they kind of say the quiet part out loud when their excuse is that a lot of minorities can't access voter ID and they don't know how to figure that out. And I think the people who say that voter ID is racist are the actual racists. We're saying that certain marginalized groups, they're unable, they're too dumb to get voter ID. Yeah. It outs their racism, and it's so flat out just blatant for everyone to see. I think it's a ridiculous argument. It's all
that has been my contention for the longest time of, oh yeah, you poor minorities are too darn stupid to go get a government ID. That's a very belittling and in fact racist. Speaking of things that we were wondering, how was this not a thing already? RFK and Brooke Rollins are trying to make it so that you can't buy unhealthy food, i.e. soda, sugary candy stuff, with food stamps, or the SNAP program, effectively, food stamps. Chris, considering the fact that if you're on food stamps, the likelihood of you also being on some sort of government subsidized healthcare plan, meaning that, well, okay, we're going to pay double now. You think this is a pretty solid win for the overall American demographic?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a slam dunk. It should be open and closed, but it won't be. You know how the Democrats are. They're going to push back on it. And even conservatives were taking the change to taking some money to post against this online, which I don't fault the company for that. I fault the conservative influencer not
Yeah.
having enough integrity to keep it 100 with their audience personally. But when it comes to these SNAP benefits, I mean, I lived in Richmond when I was about 20 years old, and we would go down to this convenience store. It was kind of a dicey neighborhood, and outside the convenience store, I'd bump into a gentleman and he'd say, "Hey, what are you buying in there?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm getting a few snacks." He'd say, "Hey, you can spend $15 if you give me 10." And I think you have to understand how much this system is completely being gamed by individuals. And it was
Mm.
CJ Pearson on Twitter. CJ Pearson said, "If the soda gets you mad, wait until you find out about the lobster tail and crab legs."
Ooh, yeah. Ivy, I mean, you know, they, I think, I mean, there could be a case to be made that nobody should be drinking soda or eating any of these super sugary stuff that'll end you up in the hospital, especially if we end up moving to a single payer healthcare system. But that's a different conversation for a different time. But I don't know. What are your thoughts as a mom of, do you give your kids this stuff? And if you don't, then should the government be?
Well, if I'm being honest, every now and then, of course, we'll get little treats, we'll get snacks, it'll be a birthday party, we'll have a cake, all that. That's me being honest. And a lot of the people who are against anything being cut from SNAP, they'll use that as an excuse of, well, people should be able to buy their kids treats. People should be able to do that. They need, we shouldn't restrict that. And I think that's just ridiculous because if you're doing that, that should be a small amount of what you're doing. And the entire purpose of the SNAP program was to supplement your food. It wasn't to create, it wasn't to take over and, cover everything and every birthday and every treat. That's not what it was ever meant to do. So I have not heard a single argument in favor of not regulating it further. And it's already been regulated for years. You cannot buy tobacco, you cannot buy alcohol, you can't even buy vitamins because those don't count as part of what they claim is a nutritious food plan, right? So I don't understand why soda, candy, the things that are purchased the very most, I don't know why those are even still being paid for. I don't know what purpose that serves.
Yeah, we will see if that gets all the way through with RFK and Brooke Rollins over there at the federal government. Ivy, Chris, we'll be back to talk more about, some surprising libs in California want taxes to go down, but only on a specific thing. Also, we'll check in with White House correspondent for Turning Point, Monica Page, right after the break. Don't go away. We'll be right back.